Okay, welcome everybody. Hello. Today we're going to be reading some stories and having a little bit of a dance.
So here's Drag Queen Storytime, brought to you by Edinburgh City Libraries, in other words, Edinburgh City Council. You can see their logo on the screen, and this was streamed on Facebook.
You put your right arm in, your right arm out, in, out, you shake it all about. You do the okey dokey and you turn around. You do the okey dokey and you turn around. That's what it's all about.
So they really think that young kids benefit from seeing a bloke in a dress prancing around with makeup, a comedy wig and sponges stuffed down his chest. Now why is that? There's an explanation on the Drag Queen UK Story Hour website. Drag Queen Storytime aims to capture the imagination and fun of the gender fluidity of childhood. In other words, they want to mess with kids' sex identity while it's still forming. And then goes on to talk about positive gender queer role models. So being sort of gender queer, transgender, whatever, is a good thing, it's not a problem, it's something to be encouraged. It then goes on to explain why Drag Queen Storytime is necessary. Because more than 4 in 5 trans people have self-harmed. More than 2 in 5 trans young people have attempted to take their own life. So there we have it. The reason they give for promoting gender fluidity is that it leads to mental health problems and suicide. I mean, we can't argue with that, can we? We obviously need positive role models of dangerous lifestyles. I mean, what's it going to be next week? Chain smokers story time? Morbidly obese person's story time? Hero addicts story time? Binge drinkers story time? Now, gender identity disorder is very genuine, it's very real, and it is a psychological problem, and people need help and understanding if they're struggling with that. But we don't promote psychological problems to children. Well, or at least we shouldn't do. Anyway, on to story time. Now, you can guess, this story is not going to be, Stickman or something. It's obviously going to be something preaching a transgender message. But off we go.
Perfectly Norman. Oh. And it's about accepting who you are.
Right, I don't dispute that. This is not about accepting who you are. This is all about failing to accept who you are.
Norman. Norman had always been normal. Perfectly normal.
Again, get the message? Normal. How boring.
Until one day, he grew a pair of fabulous wings. Look how beautiful they are. That's amazing.
Phew, thank goodness. Norman is not boring old normal anymore. He's special. You too could be special, kids. You do realise that, don't you?
Norman had imagined growing taller or growing a beard like his father, but he had never imagined growing a pair of wings. Still, they were here now, so he decided to test them out right away.
So we used to imagine growing up to be like Dad, but now a whole new path has opened up instead.
Soon, Norman was swooping around and generally having the most fun ever.
So we've gone from boring normal to special fantastic. This is really living.
But then, he had to go in for dinner. Oh no! You see, Norman had always been so normal. He didn't know if his parents would feel anything nice at all about his extraordinary wings. He wasn't sure how they were going to react. As he went in, Norman covered himself up in a great big coat.
Oh, how sad. But you know what parents are like, don't you? They're closed-minded, they spoil your fun. Not like this bloke with a black and red haystack on his head. He's really nice and open and supportive. Not like lots of those parent people.
His parents didn't notice the wings, but they did think it was odd to be wearing a coat indoors. It's very silly. Bath time was problematic. I imagine that, wearing a coat in the bath. So was bedtime. The coat was hot and uncomfortable, but Norman had decided that no one should see his wings, ever.
Again, how terrible these bad parents make him hide his wings, his true self. I mean, the trick here, of course, is if a kid did grow some extra wings all on his own, it would be a bit ridiculous that he had to hide that. But this is not really about growing wings, is it? It's about changing gender. And parents who want to steer their kids away from the destructive path towards transgenderism are actually showing love and care for their children. But this book is priming kids to dismiss their parents' concerns and to condemn them. So it's turning children against their parents, absolutely deliberately and explicitly.
The next day, Norman went to the park, but he was far too hot to play in any of his favourite games.
It's not just the closed-minded parents, it's the whole of society. It's hardly subtle, is it? I mean, this book's obviously written by a trans activist.
One day, a boy tried to pull his coat off, and Norman had to run away, hot-faced, angry and sad.
Okay, next trans activist theme, transphobic bullying. Now, often what kids say to other kids, like when they say, "What are you wearing that for? You're a boy. Boys don't wear that." That'd be classed as, "Oh, that's very transphobic." Whereas actually that sort of natural response from children is often helpful and will actually help to keep kids on a positive path. But oh no, it's all transphobic bullying.
Norman wished he'd never grown those stupid wings. Oh. Then he saw some birds high up in the sky and remembered the joy of his first flight. It occurred to Norman that it was the coat that was making Norman so miserable, not the wings.
So apparently the problem isn't that he's trying to live in the wrong gender. The problem is that he has to cover it up. I mean, the message is as subtle as a brick, isn't it?
"Why don't you take that tatty old thing off?" suggested his mum and dad. Norman looked up at them, hesitantly. His parents smiled and nodded. Norman smiled back. Then he threw off the coat and let his wonderful wings fan out. Norman leapt into the air. Finally, he was free of that coat.
So it turns out the parents are actually so-called good parents who indulge his desire to be a girl.
But he noticed a few other children wearing thick, heavy coats of their own. They looked up at Norman, and then they looked round at each other nervously. Suddenly, whoosh! The sky was filled with flying people. Norman had never felt so happy.
Joy unbounded, lots more kids realise that they're gender fluid, transgender or whatever, and they enter the wondrous fellowship of the trans community with universal happiness following.
He realised that there was no such thing as perfectly normal. However, he was perfectly Norman, which is just as it should be.
So the hint there, everyone is queer, everyone's on the gender spectrum, and everyone's welcome to step into this wonderful new world. So I hope you enjoyed that, kids. So why are some people so keen to have these drag queens in front of young children? Well, it's obviously to inspire the children to question their own gender and to encourage them to experiment, which is obviously not helpful. I mean, the simple way of looking at it is, which direction do you want to point young children in? Do you want to point them towards the seedy, sex-obsessed drag scene or towards happy family life? At the moment, they're being directed towards the seedy, sex-obsessed drag scene. Now, who do I blame for that? To be honest, it's not surprising that queer trans activists want to preach to children in schools. Okay, that's to be expected. The staggering thing is that schools, councils, libraries, teachers, head teachers, political parties allow it. And a lot of the time, it's because the men and women are too weak to stand up to it. There'll be countless people who are thinking, "Oh, I'm not really happy with this," but they just go with it in any case because they're weak. Because the problem is you enhance your career opportunities by endorsing this sort of thing. You show how tolerant and inclusive you are. The same goes for organisations as well. If you're worried your organisation's got a bit of a stuffy traditional image, Well, the way you could help with that is by sponsoring Drag Queen Storytime. So let's look at some of the organisations who put their money into it. The National Portrait Gallery, the Royal Opera House, historic royal palaces. Why do they do that? I'll tell you why they do it. They do it to prove their equality and diversity credentials in order to get grants from the government. And we're talking about the UK government here, the Conservative UK government. I mean, that's the state of play in Britain. That's the state of play in Scotland. But one of these Drag Queen Storytime things was cancelled recently. I think it was in Leeds after some protests about it. Okay, that's a victory, but it's a minor one. The same theme will pop up in other ways. If you get it cancelled in the library, they'll still be preaching it in schools. This is not going to change so long as people keep voting for political parties that go along with it. The only way it will change is when enough people start voting for parties that oppose it. Like us. Okay, thanks for watching.